You know, there's a lot of angst going. Welcome back to our show, by the way, the third hour of our program. A lot of angst in the Obama administration and among Democrats in Congress. Whenever Republicans go, "Oh, you're being a socialist," and use the S word, it makes them run for cover. The DLC in particular, the Democratic Leadership Council, which now, by the way, just parenthetically, we're finding out was started by members of the family, this notorious right-wing Christian group that owns the House, or that runs, I guess, the House on C Street, where Senator John Ensign and others live, these hardcore Christian rightists who believe that God has ordained them to leadership and they're answerable to their cult leader and not to you and me. But nonetheless, whenever the socialism word is used, the Democrats freak out. Absolutely freak out. And you constantly hear, I heard it again a couple of days ago on one of the, I don't remember if it was Face the Nation or Meet the Press or what show it was, but it was one of these, and they do the discussion with the pundits, and one of the pundits, and I think it was Cokie Roberts, but it could have been somebody else, said, well, you know, America is a center-right nation. And there's this absolute consensus that if you want to be successful, you got to be center-right. And the Republicans aren't successful because they went a little too far right. The Democrats aren't successful because they haven't gone far right enough. And I would submit to you that this is absolutely wrong, that the only Democrat who was elected president 4 times in a row, now granted, they ultimately passed a constitutional amendment to prevent that, but the Democratic Party's been around since Thomas Jefferson started it. The only Democrat to be elected 4 times in a row was the guy who arguably was a socialist, at least by the standards of the time, Franklin Roosevelt. He took on big money. He took on big capital. So anyhow, where in the world would Barack Obama be considered a conservative? George Lakey is with us. George is the visiting professor for issues in social change at Swarthmore College, the director emeritus of Training for Change, the website there, trainingforchange.org, an activist and the author of Grassroots and Nonprofit Leadership. And George, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You have been working on a project which took you to Norway.
That's right.
The land where my father's mother and father were both born, and they came to this country in 1917, and it was shortly after they came to this country, I guess, actually probably right after World War II, wasn't it, that a single-payer national health care system was put into place in Norway?
That's right, and Harry Truman, you were talking about FDR and so on. Harry Truman actually proposed doing the same thing in the U.S. and was beaten back for it.
That's right, 1947.
That's right. Yeah, they've been enjoying it for a whole long time. I first went to Norway in order to marry a Norwegian woman in 1959. That's 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I got the fruits right away of it, even though I was a foreigner studying in Norway, studying for free, by the way, at the University of Oslo, because they don't believe that higher education should require tuition. And also, what went with my being there was simply access to the universal health care system that they've got.
Mm-hmm. And while you were there most recently, you met with Kristen Clement, the director of a conservative think tank.
That's right.
Tell us, and I thought this was particularly interesting, this comment that was shared with you. Kristen, is Kristen a man or a woman?
A woman.
A woman.
Yeah,
her comment about President Obama.
And she's a leading Conservative Party politician there, and as you said, leader of a right-wing think tank. And she brought up the president by saying that she'd previously, not very long ago, been in Washington as part of a Norwegian delegation talking about the financial crisis, and she said that she was struck once again by how odd our political spectrum is from a Norwegian point of view. She said in Norway, Obama would actually be considered a right-winger.
Yeah. Well, this is the interesting thing. We did our show from Denmark for a week, just about a year ago now. It was a year ago in June, and Danish radio let us use their studios, and so we did all 3 hours for all 5 days, live from Denmark, and we had on every hour Danish politicians, members of parliament, members of the administration, newspaper editors, the whole. In fact, we had on the right-wing newspaper editor of the quite right-wing newspaper that published the Muslim cartoons that created the whole kerfuffle, you know.
Oh, yes, what a mistake that was.
Yeah, well, yeah. And he came on to defend, he's very libertarian, and he came on to defend his free speech rights. All of these right-wingers, and we tried to have, on this show, I try to have kind of an even split anyway between right-wingers and left-wingers. I debate right-wingers all the time in American right-wingers. All of the Danish right-wingers were totally in favor of their national health care system. They were totally in favor of the government putting $5 billion into building electric automobiles so that they could use them, so that they could create an entire nation where the cars were the storage system for the electricity being created by the windmills in Copenhagen Harbor that now produces 19% of the country's power. But if the cars were used as storage cells where people charge them up at home at night, and then at work they plug them in and they discharge them, and the country buys the electricity back from your car at a higher price than you pay for it. So you can actually make a profit with your car being a battery on the system. They were all in favor of that. They were all in favor, all of these right-wingers. It seemed to me that the only issue that I could tease out, and you're a far, more long-term and acute observer of this than I am, but it seemed to me that the only issue or two issues that I could tease out that really differentiated the right from the left in Denmark was that the right-wingers were opposed to more immigration by people who were not Danes, particularly people who have darker skin. And the left wing was either ambivalent about it or supported immigration rights. And the right wing was in favor, and the left wing was strongly opposed to building to unrestrained building in Copenhagen and in other cities, building skyscrapers and things like this. The left wingers wanted to maintain, natural areas and have urban planning, basically. And the right wing was very libertarian. They didn't think there should be urban planning. But when it came to things like the healthcare system or, capital punishment or the rights of gays or the role of religion in government, the most rabid right-wingers I could find shared my point of view. They were left-wingers. So tell me, on all these issues, on all these spectrums, where do the Norwegians fall on these things?
Well, as another example of broad agreement across the spectrum in Norway, you'd have their response to the big financial crisis that they had 1990 to 92, which was caused by a bubble in real estate. Very similar kind of crisis to the one that we're experiencing now. And the banks were about to fail, and so on. There was a tremendous they were really headed for a financial cliff, and they had broad agreement across the political spectrum that these banks should be seized. They took the three biggest banks that among them had 50% of the share of banking in the country, and the government simply seized those three banks. They fired the senior management, and we're not talking about the senior managers then taking a bailout that they could have a party with.
No golden parachutes.
Exactly. They fired the senior management. They sent the shareholders packing, saying you don't deserve a dime out of your malfeasance here. And then the government over time nurtured these banks back into solvency and said to the rest, in the meantime, they said to the rest of the banking sector that was also a lot of it troubled, you're on your own. Go bankrupt, find capital on your own, however you want to handle it, because we are sending the clear message to all capitalists in Norway, we are not going to take taxpayer money and bail you out of your corruption. And so as a result, now that there's this current problem, which as you know is afflicting a good deal of Europe as well as the U.S., the Norwegian banks are clean.
Right, it's amazing. But
yeah.
What's particularly interesting, George Lakey, and we only have a half a minute left here, I'm sorry, but what's particularly interesting is that while they're saying to the capitalists, we will not bail you out, unlike the Obama administration, both the Republicans and Democrats in America, they say to individuals, if you lose your job, if you get sick, if your child is born with a birth defect, if an elder person has a severe disability or is sick and dying, we will bail you out. We will take care of you.
Absolutely, because they're interested in security, in developing people's sense of security and maintenance of people's sense of community. Those are bottom line values for the Norwegians.
And that sense of community is so important to physical and mental health for human beings, and we're just ripping it apart. So the Norwegians think of Barack Obama as a hard right winger.
That's right.
Amazing. George Lakey, trainingforchange.org is the website. A great op-ed he wrote about it. You can find it over at I'm sure trainingforchange.org also. I saw it at commondreams.org. George, thanks a lot for dropping by.
Great talking with you.
Great talking with you, too. Coming up next, it's a full Monty. Can you get a discount to a brothel if you're a cyclist? And your call. Stick around. We'll be right back.